Hello, thanks for joining us. My name is Heather Pennington. I'm the Tobacco Outreach Coordinator at Franklin County Public Health. And as part of my role, I have the pleasure of working with the Franklin County Youth Vaping Task Force. This task force is a team of dedicated professionals from around the county that have come together to help increase education and improve awareness related to the youth vaping epidemic in our county. The task force has also put together a series of presentations called Clearing the Air, What You Need to Know About Youth Vaping. And before we jump to the first presentation that's already in progress, I would like to take a moment to thank all of the members of the Franklin County Youth Vaping Task Force for their contributions. I also want to thank one of our speakers, Dr. Ted Wagner from the Ohio State University Comprehensive Cancer Center, Center for Tobacco Research, and the other speaker, Mr. James Cotton, a former Buckeye football player who now leads the charge in the Tackling Tobacco campaign. I'd also like to thank Dr. Sarah Reisinger from the Ohio State University Comprehensive Cancer Center for moderating this session. If you have any questions or you'd like to learn more, please don't hesitate to contact us. I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Other chemicals. Now, as you can see, e-cigarettes come in many different shapes, sizes, and some look like a regular cigarette, but some look very different. And e-cigarettes have evolved over time. And that's a primary reason why we're seeing this change in shape and size. Early e-cigarettes looked a whole lot like cigarettes. In fact, they were called cigalikes because they resembled cigarettes so much. But e-cigarettes quickly evolved into vape pens and then what are called box mods. And this evolution was primarily for the reasons of increasing the product's appeal and its nicotine delivery, as early cigalikes really didn't do a really good job of delivering nicotine. And so users started wanting more, better nicotine delivery, something that was similar to a cigarette. It really wasn't until 2015 when we started having what's now being called the youth epidemic with e-cigarettes. In fact, e-cigarette use among youth was on the decline up until the release of the Juul e-cigarette. And so with this emergence of Juul, we saw e-cigarette use among youth skyrocket. And so it was at first unclear what did make Juul so different. And so I have a short video here that I think does a pretty good job of explaining what that was.
This is an ad for one of today's hottest products. If you don't look carefully, though, you might. This is an ad for one of today's hottest products. If you don't look carefully, though, you might miss what it's advertising. It's this little thing, and it's called Juul.
Juul looks more like a flash drive or computer device, but it is really another kind of e-cigarette.
Since it launched in 2015, Juul has taken over about 70% of the e-cigarette retail market share. It's now worth about $16 billion. And that success is often attributed to its sleek design. But the same features that make Juul a well-engineered product also make it attractive to young people, many of whom have never smoked before. And that has people worried, because devices like Juul might be designed to help smokers get off cigarettes, but they're also addicting a new generation to nicotine. So what makes this one e-cigarette so different from the rest? Answering that question starts with what you see on the outside. Juul is an e-cigarette, but it really doesn't look like one. It looks like a tech product, and it's tiny. That allows smokers to get a nicotine fix without having to worry about social stigma, but also allows young users to consume nicotine inconspicuously without having to worry about who sees them.
Going to school, having this in your pocket is a lot better than having like something this big that looks kind of like a lightsaber. You know, you could kind of Juul anywhere in discreetness.
That discreetness is a big shift for e-cigarettes. Since the first patent in 1930, designs haven't been very subtle. The first generation of e-cigarettes mimicked the shape, size, and colors of traditional cigarettes, sometimes even with a fake light-up tip. The second and third generations focused on larger and more customizable devices with longer battery life and big plumes of vapor. Then came the Juul, a stripped-down version with no buttons, no big plumes of vapor, and no complex refilling or recharging. And it comes in a variety of bright colors that set it apart from other e-cigarettes, which made it look like a tech product that young people were already familiar with. That is why people call Juul the iPhone of e-cigs. And that similarity makes sense. Juul's founders met at Stanford Design School, and one worked as a design engineer at Apple. They created the first e-cigarette that looked more like a cool gadget and less like a drug delivery device. This wasn't smoking or vaping. It was juuling.
Yeah, like how grandmas have iPhones now, it's kind of like normal kids have Juuls now. Because it looks so modern, we kind of trust modern stuff a little bit more. So we're like, we can use it. We're not going to have any trouble with it because you can trust it.
The tech aspect definitely helps people get introduced to it. And then once they're introduced to it, they're staying because they're conditioned to like all these different products. And then this is another product. And it's just another product until you're addicted to nicotine.
And that is where it gets tricky. A 2017 study found that 25% of 15 to 24-year-olds recognized the Juul in a photo, but the majority of them didn't know that it always contains nicotine. It's easy to trace that information gap. You just have to look at the ads. When you look at Juul's marketing today, you find video testimonials from adult ex-smokers.
My name is Lauren.
My name is Brandon.
My name is Carolyn.
My name is Aman. I'm 38.
But when Juul first launched, their marketing looked a lot different. When you put those ads alongside old cigarette ads, the similarities are pretty striking. Both marketed relaxation, sharing, travel, freedom, and sex appeal. It's now illegal for cigarette brands to use these kinds of suggestive advertising themes. But for e-cigarette manufacturers who had products on the market before 2016, those strategies are still unregulated. That's why a brand like Candy Pens can be promoted in DJ Khaled music videos, just like tobacco corporations used to pay stars to smoke their cigarettes on screen. But compared to cigarettes, Juuls are a lot easier to start using. Typical e-cigarettes have between 6 and 30 milligrams of nicotine per milliliter of vape liquid. One Juul pod packs in 59 milligrams. That's 3 times the nicotine levels permitted in the European Union, which is why Juul isn't sold there. But here in the US, e-cigarettes don't have the same restrictions, even though we know that nicotine dependency can prime developing brains for future substance abuse disorders. The company says that Juul's nicotine content is about as much as a pack of cigarettes, though tobacco experts say it's likely more than that. And Juuls have a patented system for delivering that nicotine. Most e-cigarettes use a potent version of nicotine called freebase that gives users a strong hit. But Juuls vaporize a liquid made from nicotine salts. Those salts allow nicotine to be absorbed into the body at about the same speed as regular cigarettes, much faster than most e-cigarettes. But unlike freebase nicotine, which can be irritating, nicotine salt goes down smoothly. So Juul packs a bigger nicotine dose into a much more pleasant hit than most devices on the market. And that has public health officials worried, because the US almost beat nicotine addiction among kids.
As cigarette smoking among those under 18 has fallen, the use of other nicotine products, and especially e-cigarettes, has taken a drastic leap.
In April, the FDA demanded that Juul submit documents on its marketing and research. A group of senators sent a letter asking Juul to stop using flavors and designs that appeal to children, and there are now 3 lawsuits alleging that Juul contains too much nicotine. In response to the concerns, the makers of Juul have pledged $30 million to combat underage use. Merchandise and marketing materials now have big warning labels on them, and the company is developing lower nicotine pods. The trouble is, there's still a lot we don't know about the long-term health impacts of e-cigarettes. Juul, like other e-cigarettes, might have set out to design a solution to a public health problem, but in a lot of ways, their product has created a new one.
And so as we see in that video, I think it does a really good job. It's a couple of years old now, but really the evolution of e-cigarettes have continued beyond Juul. However, Juul was one of the first to, and really was the first to take everything to the next level. And so those next level things include, one, being a device that was smaller and easier to use. Earlier generation e-cigarettes, as you can see here on the left, used oftentimes refillable tanks. So people had to carry around bottles of e-liquid to refill their device. Whereas products like Juul, and now even newer disposable devices, have products that are Juul pods that are very easy to switch. So if you want a different flavor, you can just pop in a different pod. Or with disposables, they sell each disposable e-cigarette in a different flavor. Also, with these products, they tended to be more reliable and have longer battery life. And so this was because earlier e-cigarettes required a lot of power in order to deliver high levels of nicotine. But as we heard in the video, Juul has higher concentrations of nicotine than any earlier e-cigarette models, and so do many disposable e-cigarettes nowadays. And as a result, they don't need a lot of voltage or power in the device to deliver huge plumes of smoke. With high concentration nicotine, you can deliver a lower charge and a lower voltage and have smaller plumes of smoke and still get significant levels of nicotine delivery. Also, as we heard, the design has been very important, especially for youth, as the products have gotten smaller and smaller and more inconspicuous. Also, the flavors are very important. Flavors in the past were okay, but if you try newer e-cigarette products, especially disposables and products like Juul, they are orders of magnitude better. A lot of e-cigarette manufacturers are now using flavor houses to develop their flavors. And it goes just beyond characterizing flavors. They're also using things called tastants, things that give a feeling like cooling feeling, or kind of the silkiness of like a milky feeling in their e-liquids, making them even more palatable and more appealing. Also, as he brought up, making the nicotine less harsh was also probably the most critical thing that Juul did. Without that, there's no way kids or adults would have been able to inhale high concentrations of nicotine like that are in Juul. Nicotine in its natural state is basic and it's really harsh. So it's very, very irritating to the mouth and the throat. And that's because it's absorbed immediately when it's in its basic form, so in its free-base form. And what Juul did, and other products have followed suit, is it actually added acid to the e-liquid. And what that does is it changes the nicotine from a free-base nicotine to a nicotine salt, or what's called protonated nicotine. And what that does is actually makes the nicotine less bioavailable, meaning it doesn't absorb as easily. Well, it doesn't absorb as easily in the mouth. So when you inhale, you can inhale large doses and it bypasses all the sensors in your mouth. But once it gets to the lungs, it's easily absorbed in the lungs, delivered to the heart and to the brain. So for quick nicotine delivery. So that was probably the most critical thing that Juul and other products have done since. And that actually pulls directly from the tobacco industry's playbook. If you look in the tobacco industry documents, back in the 50s and 60s, they were playing around with what was called ammonia technology, trying to find the sweet spot for having high nicotine delivery, but also palatability. And they found that products that were the most palatable for kids were products that used protonated nicotine or nicotine salts. And as they mentioned in the video, products like Juul and Juul itself have better nicotine delivery than many earlier e-cigarette products. And as a result, we're seeing research that's showing that they're even more addictive. Add to that the products are only getting cheaper over time, which makes sense. Most of the time products tend to get cheaper. And the evolving marketing strategies used by many of these e-cigarette companies. Early on, as we saw, Juul was one of the first to use social media marketing, not traditional marketing. Yes, that's cheaper. And so a lot of people will say, well, they're doing because it's cheaper. And that is true. And I'm sure that is one of the reasons. It also allows you to target folks as well. But even if there wasn't targeting, we do know that youth and young adults are the highest and largest consumers of social media. So just by advertising in this space, you're putting it in front of youth. And as a result, that was one critical factor also driving youth use. Another thing that's starting to emerge in the e-cigarette market is greenwashing in advertisements, which is the process of conveying a false impression or providing misleading information about how a company's products are more environmentally friendly. And here are some examples of BD sticks, which is one of the most popular e-cigarettes on the market right now. But you can see here where they're talking about the recycling program, that BD Sticks cares, their sustainability, They're going to recycle your battery. You're going to save the planet. And although greenwashing tactics don't make it explicit claims about a product's health benefits or risk profile, they have nonetheless been linked to reduced harm perceptions and increased youth appeal, because kids find this very attractive. And honestly, so do adults. But when they have looked at kids' perceptions of this, they do find that when it has this type of advertisement versus not, they find the one with the advertisement with greenwashing, they view as a safer product. So as you can imagine, as e-cigarettes continue to evolve, where they're becoming easier to use, more reliable, more appealing, have nicotine delivery that matches a cigarette, they're cheaper, they have larger advertising reach with better advertising strategies to reach youth. You can imagine that it's not a surprise that the prevalence of youth e-cigarette use is fairly high and higher than use of other tobacco products. Currently, it's at 20%. This is actually down from 28% in 2019. And that it could be the result of some new FDA regulations on the market leader, which was Juul, and products like Juul, which banned flavors in e-cigarettes that had pods, so kind of like Juul. However, we also did, as a result of that regulation, see a proliferation of disposable e-cigarettes, which I'll show you here in a second. But also a big cause of this is also likely the pandemic and kids not being in school, where we know from previous research, kids were frequently getting these devices from their friends. And even, for example, with Juul, there were some kids who were called Juulers, who would just have the battery of the Juul base and then go in the bathroom, and other kids would have their own pod. And for $1 or $2, they would be able to take their pod, put it in the other person, the Juuler's battery base, take a few puffs, and then pass it over to the next person who would put their pod in. We do know that there was a secondary market for Juul pods, and some of it was incredibly high, the amount of money that people were charging for these pods and use of these devices. Currently, the most popular e-cigarette devices on the market include Juul, Puff Bar, Vuse Alto, BD Stick, and Puff Bar Plus. I will tell you, all of these 4 products, Juul is on the decline, because see all those colored flavored pods, those aren't actually available anymore. Only the menthol and the tobacco. So the green and brown over here are available. But all the rest of these products, these disposables, are actually allowed to be flavored. So it was a loophole that the industry found. And I will tell you that Puff Bar was tried to, because of the steep increase in market share once Juul was required to only use menthol in tobacco flavorings. We saw a huge increase in Puff Bar use, and it led FDA to issue a statement and a ban on Puff Bar. However, Puff Bar has come back and said that they no longer are using tobacco-derived nicotine, which FDA has regulation over. They said that they're now using synthetic nicotine, so they found another loophole that they believe FDA does not have the ability to regulate, so they are now back on the market. So as you think about your own kids or kids in your family, what's important to know is some of the risk factors. So we know that youth are more likely to use e-cigarettes and tobacco as well if they frequently see people their age using tobacco, if their friends use tobacco. In fact, that's a really good way to kind of see how at risk your kids is. Ask them, do your friends use e-cigarettes? I'm seeing these things all over the place. Do your friends use it? If their friends are using it, might want to ask them how many of their friends are using it. Typically, if it's more than 3, it's a good chance that they're using it as well. Another is doing poorly in school. So kids doing poorly in school, kids who suffer from depression, anxiety, or high stress, or kids that have lack of support or involvement from parents, or who have a parent that uses tobacco, are all more likely to use. So if you find that, this might be a risk factor, or you're just ready to talk about it with your kid, how do you do that? Well, first, before the talk, it's important to know the facts. So it's important to have credible information about e-cigarettes. You don't want to lie to kids or just try to scare them. It's important to have the facts. And so a really good website is a Surgeon General's website, and there's a link here that you can type in. I think we're sharing the slides afterwards. So after you know the facts, make sure when you are having this conversation, you're going to be patient and ready to listen. It's not a good thing to come at your kid hard, ready for a lecture. You don't want to criticize. It's important to encourage and have an open dialogue. And I think the next one here is the most important thing. It's okay for this conversation to take place over time, just in bits and pieces. If you have, if you have have them confined in the car on a drive home from school or something, you don't need to knock all this out at one time. You can set the ball on the tee for the next person or the next time you're available to have a conversation about it. Also, it's important to set a positive example and be tobacco free yourself. And obviously, free help is available if you visit smokefree.gov or call the quit line. So when you're ready to start the conversation, it's important to find the right moment. You probably don't want to just rush your kid and say, "Hey, we need to talk." It might be good to find a more natural time for the discussion and increase the likelihood that your kid will listen. Maybe in a situation where you see someone using an e-cigarette in person or in a video and your kid happens to be there with you, or you're passing an e-cigarette or vape shop when you're walking or driving, or you're seeing an e-cigarette advertisement in a store or a magazine or on the internet, and your kid's there with you. That would be a good time, to start asking them a question, and ask them, "Hey, what do you think about e-cigarettes? Hey, I'm seeing that over there." And then be prepared to answer their questions. So, if your kid asks, "Why don't you want me to use e-cigarettes?" You can say, these are examples. You don't have to use these. And a lot of these are adapted from the CDC, and the links there at the bottom too for more ways to answer. I should say that. You can say something like, "Science shows that e-cigarettes contain ingredients that are addictive and can harm different parts of your body. We do know that e-cigarettes, while they don't have a high, while they have lower levels and fewer toxicants than cigarettes, we do know they cause lung inflammation. We do know that they have deliver nicotine in high doses, which can be harmful for your heart, increase blood pressure, those sorts of things. And there are some studies that are showing that e-cigarettes can cause DNA damage and mutations, which could be a sign that they could have some increased risk for cancer. Again, always less than cigarettes, but still not safe." Another way you can explain this to kids, why you wouldn't want them to use e-cigarettes, is, right now your brain is still developing, which means you're more vulnerable to addiction. Many e-cigarettes contain nicotine. Using nicotine can change your brain to make you crave more nicotine. It can also affect your memory and concentration, and I don't want that for you. Well, if they say something like, "I thought e-cigarettes didn't have nicotine, just watering and flavoring." Maybe you thought that too. You say something like, "I used to think that too, but many e-cigarettes do have nicotine. There are also other chemicals in them that can be harmful." And another thing is, if you don't have the answer, you can always have them look at the Surgeon General's website with you. And I have other places to go here at the end of the talk that I'll share with you as well. What if they say, "Aren't e-cigarettes safer than conventional cigarettes?" One thing I want to say here is, don't lie to your kids. So what do we actually know about this? We know that e-cigarettes are likely less harmful than cigarettes, but they're not safe. FDA says that, CDC even says that, the Surgeon General's report says that. But that doesn't, so just because that they're less harmful than cigarettes doesn't mean they're safe. But you don't have to say they're just as bad as cigarettes, they're awful. You can have the more nuanced and accurate approach, which is that they're less harmful but not safe. And because your brain is still developing, scientific studies show that this isn't safe for you to use any tobacco product that contains nicotine, including e-cigarettes. And kids will appreciate that. And studies that have looked at this, kids find that a more balanced approach is not only more believable, but they're more accepting of it as well. What if your kid says, I or my friends have tried e-cigarettes and it was no big deal? First, don't get mad. You want to let them know that you appreciate their honesty. And maybe say, in the future, I hope you or your friends will stay away from e-cigarettes and other tobacco products, including cigarettes. And again, science shows that they contain ingredients that are addictive and can harm different parts of your body. Lastly, what if your kid comes at you? Maybe you're a tobacco user, an e-cigarette user, or were in the past, and they say something like, you use tobacco, so why shouldn't I? Well, again, you don't want to get angry with them, but, maybe you'd say something, well, if I could live my life over again, I never would have started smoking. I learned that people who smoke cigarettes are much more likely to develop and die from certain diseases than people who don't smoke. This was really scary, so I quit smoking. So finding a way to relate to them while sharing the information, but not trying to just scare them. Reasonable information is important, and a nice, open, collaborative discussion is the way to go. Now, for additional resources, for middle school and junior high kids, I think this is a great resource. This actually just came out last week, and actually includes a senior research scientist from Ohio State, but this is for discovery education. And it's, like I said, it's more for middle school and junior high kids, maybe high school students, but mainly middle school and junior high. But it's a virtual field trip where essentially this younger kid, probably looks like maybe a 13-year-old, is going around and investigating, the chemistry of e-cigarettes, their effects on lung health and marketing and those sorts of things. So something to sit down with your kid and watch, and even beforehand, it might be better if you watch it before them, just so you can be prepared. Just in case, middle school kids are also at risk for using e-cigarettes. I should have said that. They're actually at higher risk than high school students. Recent papers are showing that middle school students compared to high school students have greater interest in trying these products. In the Q&A, we could discuss why that might be. For parents and teachers, and I should also say high school students, this is, I think, a great website. It also has evidence that shows that kids who did go through this course had increased perceived harmfulness and addictiveness of e-cigarettes and reduced intent to try e-cigarettes. And so this is, like I said, for parents, teachers, and high school students could probably go through it on their own as well. But this is a free online course put on by Stanford. It's their Vaping Prevention Online Toolkit course. It has videos, handouts, many things that'd be useful. And lastly, for kids that are using e-cigarettes and find that they can't stop, a lot of kids have what's called optimistic bias, where they believe that they can't get addicted to e-cigarettes. That's unfortunate, because obviously, as you've seen, e-cigarettes deliver just as much nicotine as cigarettes. So they're likely just as addictive. So for those kids that really do need help quitting, I'd like to encourage you to reach out to mylifemightquit.org or the toll-free number at the top of the slide. This is put on through Ohio Department of Health. It's the Quit line, but they're specially trained coaches that provide personalized support, build relationships with your kids that promote quitting tobacco, and the coaches emphasize that the decision to stop is personal and provide information to help cope with stress, navigate social situations, and support developing a tobacco-free identity. And this includes 5 coaching sessions by phone, live texting or chat with a coach who will listen and help your kid navigate social situations while finding healthy ways to cope with stress. So phone, text, live chat, it's a very outstanding program. So for kids that might need a little bit more support. And I want to thank you. And also I have my email address there as well as the website for the Cancer Center. And you can search for the Center for Tobacco Research. You can see all of our research, and we frequently have research studies, but also, some helpful tips for tobacco use and things are forthcoming. So be on the lookout for that. But also my email's on there. So if you ever have any questions about potential resources or the science of this, I do a lot of different talks on e-cigarettes, but I'm happy to share other talks or resources that I have. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Wagner. That was a great presentation, and thanks for underscoring the importance of preventing youth use and how to speak to our children. For our final question this evening, please select the response that best reflects your confidence in your ability to identify an electronic cigarette or a vaping device. And so the slides or the poll should come up really soon. So I'll go ahead and read the question again as it's getting populated. Please select the response that best reflects your confidence in your ability to identify an electronic vaping device, electronic cigarette, or a vaping device. Great. Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from a former OSU football player, James Cotton. James was a defensive end for the Buckeyes in the late 90s, and he's a Big Ten and Sugar Bowl champion who also played for the NFL. More recently, James has focused his efforts on educating youth through his nonprofit, the Buck Icon Foundation, and the Tackling Tobacco campaign. Please welcome James Cotton.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Super excited to be here. That was an amazing presentation by Dr. Ted there. I learned a lot. I'm always searching for new information. And my opportunity to be a part of anything tobacco, whether it's vaping, cigarettes, it's near and dear to my heart because I've had family members that suffer, just like maybe a lot of us on here listening, to the ill effects that is caused by all of the cancerous chemicals that are involved in the nicotine and the other chemicals that's placed in cigarettes. And so for me to have a platform and an opportunity to provide some of the things that I've used over the years that prompted me to just want to be a healthy person and to stay away from harmful products and harmful people is really exciting for me. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. I played for the Buckeyes in 1998 and 99 and was drafted by the Chicago Bears and played for the Bills and the Atlanta Falcons for about 8 seasons. And I retired. And when I retired, I had some family members that had succumbed or were dealing with cancer. And so for me, I said, if I ever have the opportunity, this is my way of paying it forward. And I want to inform as many people because I don't want them to go and visit their family members in hospitals, watching them hooked up to machines and so forth and so on. And so I'm 44 years old and I've never once tried the vape. I've never once tried marijuana or a cigarette. And that's what I challenge young kids when I get the opportunity to go out and speak to them, to make that same commitment. And when I talk to the youth or parents, speaking directly to you guys, is that you guys always somehow see the finished product, especially when it comes to sports. You guys see the games on Saturdays or Sunday, whether it's college or professional. You just see the end result. But not many of us see the preparation that it goes into being a professional athlete, being a collegiate athlete, being a high school athlete. And so that same mentality, that's what it takes to keep your children, keep the youth away from getting involved in harmful products such as cigarette smoking and vaping. And what I like to utilize is the keys to success. And on my keys to success, there are three things: commitment, discipline, and self-worth. And so the first thing I like to ask kids to do is make the commitment. That's the first thing you have to do, is make the commitment to live a tobacco-free lifestyle, to live a lifestyle where you are absolutely free from vaping and don't succumb to the pressure. So you have to make that commitment. You have to make a pledge. I used to have kids when I was able to get into schools, and we write out a little pledge, a little ledger, just for a mental note for them to stick on their refrigerator or put it someplace to where they could see it every day, because that makes a huge difference in trying to combat and not succumb to the peer pressure. Is just having that mental note, that literal note, where you have a physical reminder to remind you that you've made a commitment to stay away from harmful products and harmful people, because people can be just as harmful just through their influence on, no matter who you are, we could all be influenced somehow. And that's why marketing is so important. Dr. Ted talked about the marketing that these companies use, like social marketing is right there, right at the kids' fingertips. And so now you just have to get your kids to practice these essential life skills that I'm talking about, which is commitment. And these are things that can be practiced. So what exercises I like to do with the youth is just, these are ways we can practice commitment. That's doing your schoolwork, that's being on time for things. Your parents make a commitment to you day in and day out to make sure you're taken care of. But there are a ton of ways that we can practice commitment. And the first way to go about it is saying no, and to realize the type of chemicals that's involved with tobacco usage and Juul and vaping and things of that nature. So you just got to make the commitment. You have to practice the commitment. And what makes commitment work is my second key to success, which is discipline. A lot of kids like to think that, oh, discipline is when you get a spanking or when you get yelled at or something like that. But no, discipline is practicing self-control. What do you do when nobody is watching? I know, as myself as a retired professional athlete and collegiate athlete, is that I had to do things when nobody was watching me. I had to make sure that I was working out. I had to make sure that I was taking care of my body. I watched what I put into my body. And so I was able to develop a discipline. But if you're not involved with sports, you have other opportunities to be disciplined. Just doing the small details in life, honestly, just being random acts of kindness, that develops discipline. And so this is what I love to share with parents, because a lot of the parents just are so curious, like, well, how can I engage with my children? You engage with them by just doing random acts of kindness with them, doing some of the smaller things that it takes to just develop that discipline, whether that's getting them to bed on time, making them spend just an hour on social media and taking their device away. There are so many ways we could utilize being disciplined. And so we just got to make sure that we're taking the opportunity and taking the time, because right now these children are so influenced, and attention spans are very, very minute these days. I have 4 children myself. And so I'm a firm believer that you have to grasp their attention. And these are ways that you can grasp their attention, is by being active with them on practicing and developing these essential life skills, because none of us was born with these skill sets. I wasn't born with them. You wasn't born with them. These are things that are learned over time with just repetitive behaviors. And I read an awesome book called Atomic Habits, where you just try and increase your daily discipline by 1% a day. And after the end of 30 days, you've increased your percentage by 30%. I think that's phenomenal. And I think that's something that you can incorporate in your lives. And that's why it's important to me, is just to get this information out there and to inspire and encourage children through the fact that this is what I use to not only graduate from high school, get a college degree, get drafted into the NFL. That's like the tip of the iceberg. Me as a kid, I was like a dream come true for me to have the opportunity to get drafted, but it didn't happen because I didn't practice. It happened because I practiced these essential life skills, the commitment, the discipline. And then my third key to success is self-worth. So we talked about discipline, we talked about commitment, we talked about discipline, and then we talking about self-worth. That's the third key to success. Self-worth. What you put into your body is what you're going to get out of it. And so once we understand and we tell that to our children, all of the ill effects that come along with what Dr. Ted said, very, very interesting that Juul and vaping has just the same amount of nicotine and harmful products that cigarettes does. Now, smoking cigarettes has declined when juuling and vaping has went up. There's an interesting parallel that the science behind it is just basically showing that once you have the opportunity to make a difference and getting them to understand the parallel when it comes to smoking rates and juuling rates and the ingredients and all of this stuff that harmful to your body and your brain, the self-worth is just one of the main things that I predicate myself on because I value myself. What I put into my mind, what I put into my body, I understand that that's what my body's going to do to kick it out. And so that's what I love to share. And then once you complete the keys to success, master those three keys to success, that is a great opportunity for everyone to understand, well, this is why I should say no to cigarette use. This is why I should say no to vaping, all of those things. So that will conclude my presentation. That's one of the things that I like to share with everyone is just the simple keys to success. Is nothing glamorous. It's nothing out of the ordinary. But once we master those skill sets and understand how important that is, and it's a great opportunity for you guys to use it as a bonding experience because as adults, we could all use the opportunity to bond. We could all use the opportunity to get to know and understand our children just a little bit better so we can understand what triggers them, like why are they hanging out with the people that they're hanging out with and what floats their boat, so to speak. So I keep close tabs on my kids' friends, and understand who they're hanging out with. So that's going to be extremely important. I got a junior high school kid, and I got a kid in elementary school, and then I got two toddlers at home. So we got a very busy household and everybody's leading by example. And so if the parents smoke, I don't know what the science is behind it, but I would assume there's probably about a 75 to 80% chance that the kid will smoke. And the one thing, if you are a smoker and a parent, you have a great opportunity to bond and try and quit smoking. It's going to be difficult, just like Dr. Ted said and explained, it's going to be difficult, but I've had children or I've had some youth and some teens where I've spoken at high schools where they were ashamed to admit that they smoked or tried to use. And at the presentation, they said, hey, you know what? This is a great opportunity to admit what I did, and I would like to get some help. And so a lot of kids don't mind speaking up, but it's up to us as parents and as adults and administrators to watch the symptoms and to be conscious of what kids are going through, and just be there and just be a resource for the children and keep providing the resources. That's what I love doing, and that's why I do what I do.
Thank you, James. Community efforts like yours and your 3 keys to success are vital to preventing youth use. So we appreciate it. Thanks so much. The last part of our program tonight is the question and answer session. During this time, I will read questions that have been submitted. We want to be mindful of your time. So if we don't directly answer your question this evening, we'll do our best to incorporate it into the archived recording, and the materials will be sent to your email address that you used to register for the presentation. You are also welcome to continue to send us questions either directly to Heather Pennington, Franklin County's Tobacco Prevention Coordinator, or to our speakers, as well as members of the task force. And so our first question tonight is, what about full body Zen vapors? What they say and what they say about not containing nicotine, PEG, 400, vitamin E acetate, diacetyl, and they are drug free. Is it safe? Is it something that as a child should be permitted to use or try once? So maybe Ted, could you weigh in here, please?
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, so really good question. So is it for a child? No, I would 100% say no, it's not for a child. And one thing, and I put it down in the Q&A. So one thing that's important is that the harm from e-cigarettes is not from the nicotine. So nicotine by itself is the addictive component, but it's not the most harmful part in terms of, lung cancer or lung disease. It does play a role in cardiovascular disease, but it's not the most harmful part. What actually the most harmful part, which these other products like full bodies and vapors do contain, are things like flavorants and carrier agents. Some are flavor free, which is fine, but it's the heating of those things like vegetable glycerin and propylene glycol that when you heat them, you're actually inhaling things like aldehydes, which we know cause lung disease and cancer. And you also are inhaling different volatile organic compounds. Also, a lot of those products contain things like CBD or CBG or melatonin. And there really hasn't been great research yet on the effects of those being inhaled over long periods of time, especially melatonin. Melatonin was not approved to be inhaled, but also same for CBD and CBG, which will have some, mild psychoactive effects, but mostly kids who are using them, my understanding is often it's to increase relaxation and those sorts of things. So again, I wouldn't say it's safe for kids. Also be careful because, the big EVALI epidemic, so the vaping and lung injury, was due to a lot of products that many of them were black market products, but primarily were THC-based products and not nicotine e-cigarettes. So with kind of some of these small companies that were trying to save money by cutting down their e-liquids with a cheaper replacement of vitamin E acetate. Again, I understand that this product doesn't have vitamin E acetate in it, but it's just, it's important that for an adult who was going to use this, not a kid, I don't think kids should use this, but for an adult, that they would want to use a trusted brand and supplier as well.
Thanks, Ted. There is another question here about the use of vaping along with THC. So adding the THC and with the nicotine liquid.
Yeah, so yeah, we definitely see that if we're talking about concurrent use. So obviously kids are definitely using THC in vaping devices. Interestingly, when you vape THC, it actually delivers THC faster and in higher amounts than if you smoke the same amount. So there's a lot of research on that. So it's something people have to be careful about. But yes, similar to what we would see with like blunts with cigars, where people would hollow out a tobacco cigar and add marijuana to it. Kids are also doing this as well with THC products by adding nicotine to it. So you get a stimulant combined with a hallucinogen, and you increase the effects. So yeah, very common for kids to do it. So it's a way for them to have a little bit more energy while they're vaping THC, and it also different types of THC, but we don't necessarily need to go into that. But yeah, very common. About 22% of high school students reported that they were using or vape THC within the last year, and about 5% of those are daily users.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but I think we're running a little short on time. So any other questions, we'll make sure that we include in the presentation. As we wrap up this evening, I wanted to make sure again to reiterate that any additional questions can be addressed by Dr. Wagner or James directly, and their email addresses are provided here, and they'll be included in the presentation that we send. As well as if you're interested in joining or supporting our task force, please contact Heather Pennington, and her information will be provided as well. And in addition to all the resources that Dr. Wagner provided earlier today in the presentation, the archive presentation will include additional links to support programs and items of interest, such as My Life, My Quit, and the NOT program. And we have a participant who is a tobacco treatment specialist at Altman Hospital, and we'll be sure to include those information as well. Just as a reminder, the series will return in the fall and provide an in-depth discussion about several topics related to youth use and vaping devices. The fall sessions are going to explore concerns about youth vaping and why it's problematic. We'll also explore the tobacco industry and influence on youth use and their marketing tactics. And the final session is going to discuss strategies for preventing youth use and tools to help them quit. And so as the dates become near, we will send out an invitation to the email address you used to register for tonight's program. Once again, we want to thank you again for joining this evening's presentation, and we hope that you found it informative. Please take a moment to complete the survey on your screen before you close your browser. And thank you very much again.